for all things Halloween. This is Hauntformer, and with the new release of a, ant-themed movie in theaters currently, I have decided to take a look at the best ant-themed movie of all time, and a really fantastic horror film at that. Today, we are talking about the 1954 sci-fi horror film, Them! Them is a 1950s horror sci-fi film, and a lot of horror films at the time were about nuclear fallout or giant animals or giant bugs. There's movies like Tarantula, there's, alien movies going on at this period in movie history, but one of the best is Them. And it's kind of unfortunate that a lot of people don't talk about this film because there's other movies that are overshadowing it, like the 1930s King Kong and the 1950s Creature from the Black Lagoon, but Them is really overlooked, and it's pretty unfortunate. And I think out of a lot of the 50s movies and, those earlier sci-fi horror films, Them might be my personal favorite. The basic story is there is a sergeant of a police squad and a trooper who stumble across the fact that a lot of people have been murdered mysteriously in the desert, and there's these super creepy wind noises which make the atmosphere of this film so intense. Then they find this little girl who won't speak. She's just been walking in the desert, and finally when they sit her down, all she can scream is them, and they're not really sure of what that means. But anyways, long story short, they get in contact with this scientist, and he believes that they know what's going on, and it turns out because of nuclear radiation, the ants in the desert actually are growing in size, becoming giant ants that eat people, and it's honestly pretty terrifying. The rest of the film involves the military and the FBI and various agencies trying to figure out how to stop these ants. There is a queen ant, and the ant queen and some of the other colony ants actually begin flying and going to different places, so they have to try to track them down. This movie is a big inspiration for films like Aliens, James Cameron's film, because of the way, the colonies of the ants were displayed. But this film is really a pioneer in practical effects. As I mentioned with the 1980s Thing review that I did a couple weeks ago, Them is a pioneer of a lot of practical effect techniques, puppetry, animatronics, and various other components. This film, I believe, won a lot of awards for its practical effects, especially with the giant ants. And the sound that these ants emit is terrifying. I believe it's bird noises, actually, that were edited somehow to make it the ant noises, which is pretty crazy. The giant ants are one of my favorite movie monsters, not just because they look super awesome, but also because they're super freaky. Yeah, they actually have to take these things down by either shooting them in the antenna. Shoot the antennae!
Get the antennae! Get the antennae!
Or they can use flamethrowers to kill the giant ants. There's a lot of very suspenseful scenes, especially where some of the scientists and officers have to descend into the ant colonies after they've wiped them out to make sure that all of the life has been sucked out of the colony, out of the nest, the ant nest. And you don't really think of ants being that terrifying, because they're so tiny in the real world. But if they actually were a large creature, you can just imagine how terrifying they would actually be, especially considering their strength and their immense intelligence. Very, very interesting stuff. And I learned a lot about ants from this movie. And, it really goes to show that the filmmakers put a lot of time and effort into making the film seem realistic and logical, and I really love when people care about their product. So Them is a staple of classic sci-fi horror of monster films. It really began the craze of giant monsters, giant animals like tarantula, giant spiders, giant worms, stuff like that. But I think Them is the originator of it and perhaps the best of its kind. Them is a great ant-themed movie. If you want to check out more ant-themed movies, of course, I'm kind of doing this because Ant-Man and the Wasp is in theaters, and I love superhero and Marvel movies, but that's not what this channel is about. So overall, I am going to give 1954's Them a 4.5 out of 5 skulls. This is a fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you check it out. It's pretty freaky, so be warned. I know a lot of people think just because a film is old doesn't mean it's scary. I beg to differ. Go watch Them. Thank you so much for watching this R.I.P. review, and remember, as always, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.